It's no secret that turn-based JRPGs are not my favorite genre. Unless there's great visuals to hold it up, like Persona 5, or an unforgettable story, as in Yakuza Like a Dragon, or Bulbasaur is there, I don't tend to get very far with them. Typically, I find it to be a little too slow for my liking, and I start to lose attention quickly. I say all this so that when I tell you the turn-based combat is the best part of Monarch, you'll understand how disappointingly mediocre the rest of the game is. Monarch is a new JRPG from Landcar Studios, and right from the start it wears its inspiration from Shin Megami Tensei and the Persona series on its sleeve. In fact, there is a connection to those games, but it's tenuous at best. Ryutaro Ito, the co-writer of some of the Shin Megami Tensei games, did work on scenario planning for Monarch. Unfortunately, after nearly 3 decades of superior Shin Megami Tensei and Persona games that have followed those titles, it's just not enough. Monarch's story, while sort of intriguing at the beginning, falls flat pretty quickly. The player character awakens in a locked-down school with no memories as madness-inducing mist obscures the upper floors, trapping students in insanity loops. A teacher who knows way too much about the other world and offers no explanation as to how, infodumps a lot of unneeded background information to the player. Meanwhile, the answers to questions I had in attempt to understand the story were met with a, "It's not the right time to talk about that." The characters aren't memorable, and the ones that I do remember feel very flat. Nozomi, your first companion, is the former Student Council president, and now president of the secret True Student Council, which is a real thing. Her only personality traits are that she panics easily and feels that she is unfit to lead. I am inclined to agree with her. Even by the end of the first chapter, her character doesn't seem to have grown very much, she just has her old position back. Chio, the protagonist's sister, is an anime protagonist's little sister. She doesn't have any other traits.
What is that?
A portal to the other world, a trace of the abyss. That call is what connects to the ideals, little miss. I fear this abuse is becoming mundane. I can't even muster the words to complain.
Vanitas is probably the most memorable character, as the protagonist's Monarch, see Persona, but he might already be my least favorite character in all of video games. He speaks almost exclusively in rhyming couplets until he switches to unmetered alliteration and then back again with no pattern. The English voice actor for this character seems to be going for Josh Gad as Olaf, which maybe I wouldn't have done for a demon that bestows otherworldly powers to you. The basic setup of the game is that each of the 7 buildings that make up the school serve as the home of each of the bosses that represent one of the different 7 deadly sins. The upper floors of each building are covered in mist. While traversing misted floors, you and your companion will gain mad points, and at 100% mad, your character will die. Essentially, the misted floors are the dungeon, and your sanity is the resource that will cause you to eventually retreat and regroup. Mad increases over time, regardless of what you're doing, so it isn't like Persona where you can gauge your SP usage carefully to spend longer in the dungeon. You have a set amount of time you can be on a misted floor. At the beginning of each floor, you'll receive a call on your smartphone that transfers you to the other world, where all combat takes place. I will actually compliment the turn-based combat of Monarch. It lives somewhere between the traditional turn-based JRPG combat I'm used to and a tactics game like Fire Emblem, and it finds a pretty happy medium there with some memorable mechanics. I must unfortunately reveal to you now that there is only one enemy in the game, and that is this skeleton. Sometimes the skeletons have different weapons. One has a bow, one has a sword, one has a big sword, etc. I will never complain about enemy variety in another game ever again. Outside of the actual bosses, it is just skeletons all the way down. In addition, the third party member of your team is not a third person, but yet another of the same skeleton. At least with a fun haircut, so that's good. Combat utilizes a number of stats such as agility and luck, and a combination of ranged and melee spells and attacks that have a radius and a percentage chance to hit. Each of your basic attacks can be performed for free, while the authorities, which are spells, increase your mad gauge. There's a second gauge called Awakening that slowly powers up during combat, and you can also add to it by using Resolve and waiting out your turn. Becoming Awakened drastically increases your attack power for 3 turns, but if you can manage to reach 100% Madness on the same turn you reach Awakening, you will reach Enlightenment. I was not able to pull this off, but theoretically it'd make you unstoppable for a few turns. Poison pods, healing fields, and breakable obstacles can be scattered around the field to add another layer of strategy. Altogether, I actually had fun in combat, but there's of course another issue: getting to combat in the first place. On each floor you are guaranteed 2 battles, one when you reach the floor and one at the end. Outside of that, encounters can only be triggered by pulling out your smartphone and dialing random phone numbers and hoping you get lucky. That's right. At level 4, I stood next to Vanitas as instructed and I dialed random numbers into my phone several times. Each time I was pulled into a battle with level 99 enemies and was forced to flee. So there's no real grinding in this game, you essentially only can fight during the assigned combat sequences. If you're not strong enough for a battle, tough shit. Figure it out. Your character's base stats are the 7 deadly sins. You'll stat your character at the beginning by answering a personality test, which is a fun feature I appreciated. There are random students that will ask personality test questions scattered around the school too, and answering those net you additional stat points. Encounters will buff your stats, but not in a way that's made clear. When I finished a battle, I'd see that I gained 7 lust points, and I would have no idea why. There's also a pretty basic skill tree that unlocks attacks. While there are a few passives on there, I didn't see nearly enough. I only need so many active attacks. The only gear upgrades that are available are actually for your skeleton friend, or fiend, and you can equip different kinds of headgear, armor, and footwear to boost their stats and give them new abilities. This is a key element that should be underlined because you will definitely come up against a difficulty barrier fast if you're not upgrading your skeleton. The following is a sort of broad-reaching statement, and I have to preface this by saying that I love a lot of lower budget and smaller games. Most of them, even. I don't know that I've ever played a game that feels this low budget. The animations are stiff, the art is unremarkable, the textures are blurry, even on the PS5 version, and the English voice acting is so stilted I'm beginning to suspect that some of the actors literally phoned it in. In addition, the voice acting consistently feels like it's being paced inordinately with long intervals of silence between lines. It reminds me a bit of the problems I have with Kingdom Hearts 3's voice acting. The entire game is themed heavily around the human mind, but none of those themes seem to mean anything or relate to the story in a meaningful way. It's all set dressing. At this point, I cannot figure out how or why the 7 deadly sins fit into the story other than that they were a cool thing in Full Metal Alchemist. You remember that? Characters will drone on about the power of the mind, the ego, pseudosciences about brainwashing and control, but they never actually say anything. This is a hard thing to quantify, but I almost don't feel as if I've actually been playing this game. It feels like it's a bunch of textures and sounds I'm interacting with sometimes. None of it feels real or lived in. It's an issue that persists a lot through the game, all the way through the 6 or so hours that I've played so far. Monarch creates the most inorganic means imaginable of keeping the player on a linear path. There will be student guards at certain doors that just repeat, "You can't go in there," with no further explanation. Open stairwells are inaccessible because it's not the right time to go there yet. The story is about as linear as it gets, which isn't a detriment, but the game steers you through the linear areas in such an outright obvious way that I found myself sighing exasperatedly every few minutes. Some of the stairs are barricaded, indicating you can't go that way, but others will be open with an invisible barrier and no explanation. I haven't talked about the music yet, which, following its spiritual predecessors, Shin Megami Tensei, does actually slap. I've enjoyed the entire soundtrack, and the vocal songs that play during the boss battles are actually really great. A friend of mine described Monarch as, "What if Shin Megami Tensei was a spin-off of Persona?" And they are absolutely right. But with probably the worst execution I could imagine. Unfortunately, most of the overall package comes together to create a very mediocre RPG. Almost nothing about it is noteworthy, and it's not even exceptionally bad, it's just forgettable at every turn. Anything that you're looking for in Monarch is being done better in a dozen other games that you can play right now instead. I recommend this game only for hardcore JRPG enthusiasts who love similar games from NIS America like the Caligula series, and can ignore this kind of poor craftsmanship. Anyone who's taken an interest in Monarch because of the relation to Shin Megami Tensei and Persona, give it a pass. Thank you to NIS America for providing us with a free code to play before launch. I played this game on my PlayStation 5. If you'd like to see our review of the full game, head over to GameLuster.com.